Is everyone all right?
We have the child. It's time to go.
Is everyone all right?
It wasn't the scream that haunted them. It was the silence that followed. In a quiet suburb of Maple Ridge, just 20 miles outside Charlotte, North Carolina, 8-year-old Ellie James vanished, without a trace, on her way home from piano lessons. No tire marks, no forced entry, no ransom. One moment, she was waving goodbye to her teacher in the driveway. 10 minutes later, she was gone. By the next morning, her photo was plastered across utility poles, gas stations, and Facebook feeds. 100 volunteers walked the streets. Drones buzzed overhead. Even bloodhounds were brought in. Still nothing. It was like the earth had swallowed her whole. The community went into mourning before the truth was even known. Vigils were held. A stuffed bear and bouquet shrine grew under the stop sign by her street. Her mother, Paula James, stopped speaking altogether. Her father sat in front of their house every night with a porch light burning, as if Ellie might still come walking home. Everyone had a theory, a passing drifter, a family secret, even a neighbor's grudge. But after 23 days with no sign of life, the leads dried up, and the town quietly began to accept the unthinkable. Ellie was never coming home. That's when Officer Dana Mercer showed up with a dog nobody wanted. Dana wasn't new to the force. In fact, she transferred back home from Atlanta after 15 years in narcotics and canine operations. But she hadn't planned on bringing Thor with her. Thor was a massive German shepherd, grizzled and tense, with a past as complicated as any man Dana had worked with. He'd been retired early after his handler was killed during a raid, and no one could seem to get through to him since. Most of the force thought he was done, unstable, maybe even dangerous. But Dana saw something else. She saw a dog who still had work to do. So when Ellie's case went cold and the town began forgetting, Dana requested a fresh look, with Thor leading the way. The department barely blinked. They were out of options. "You really think the dog's going to sniff out a ghost?" one officer joked as Dana clipped Thor's leash at the edge of Ellie's neighborhood. "Let's find out," she said. The first day was a bust. Thor sniffed a dozen yards, barked at a few trash cans, and snarled at a postal truck. Dana walked him up and down 3 streets, retraced Ellie's route from her piano lesson home, even let him off leash in the community garden behind the school. Nothing. But the next morning was different. As soon as Dana opened the door of her cruiser and Thor hopped out, his ears went up, tail stiff, body tense. He didn't bolt, but he pulled hard toward a narrow cul-de-sac just a few blocks from Ellie's house. The kind of street where the trees shaded too much and the mailboxes hadn't been cleaned in months. At the end of the lane stood a beige 2-story house with cracked shutters and ivy crawling up the side. Nothing about it screamed suspicious. In fact, it was boring ordinary. Dana recognized the mailbox name, Wainwright. Older couple, Harold and Joanne. Been in town for 30 years. No kids, no prior. But Thor wouldn't budge. He circled the house like he was reading invisible ink. At the side door, he stopped, then growled. Low, sharp. "Easy," Dana whispered, kneeling beside him. There was nothing she could see, just a garden hose, a wheelbarrow, and a basement storm door that looked like it hadn't been opened since Clinton was in office. Thor sat down hard in front of it, barked once, then looked up at Dana, and for the first time in the case, she felt something other than hopeless. Back at the precinct, her report drew rolled eyes and dismissive shrugs. "They already searched that house on day 4, said Captain Rollins. No sign of forced entry. The old man even offered coffee. Dana didn't care. Something's off. Thor's picking up something. Let me go back in." Rollins sighed. "Unless you've got probable cause, you'll need another warrant. And Judge Simmons isn't exactly handing those out like candy." But Dana knew how this worked. K-9 officers had leeway, especially when it came to scent detection. She filed for a secondary review and called it a noise complaint just in case. 2 days later, she stood once again at the Wainwright's door, badge out, warrant in hand, and Thor by her side. If you've made it this far, you already know this story isn't just about a girl or a dog. It's about instinct, persistence, and the moment someone refuses to give up when everyone else already has. Subscribe to Heroes for Animals to follow real stories like this, where courage comes on four legs. Joanne Wainwright opened the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Back again," she said, tilting her head. "We already spoke to the other officers." "Yes, ma'am. Just following up on some scent signals. Won't take long." She hesitated, but let them in. Thor moved like he was on a mission. Through the hallway, past the dusty dining room into the kitchen, then down the stairs. The basement smelled like mothballs and pine saw. There were shelves full of paint cans, boxes of Christmas lights, and a washer that hadn't been run in weeks. Dana glanced around. Nothing strange until Thor stopped right in front of the far wall. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He just stared, ears forward, tail motionless. Dana stepped closer. The wall was pale blue drywall, but there were hairline cracks near the corner, almost like a seam, and the paint too fresh. She placed her hand on it. Warm. Too warm for a basement. She turned toward Joanne. "What's behind this wall?" Joanne blinked. "Storage. My husband built it years ago. Just old junk. Do you mind if I do," she cut in, suddenly sharper. "You've had your look, officer. Now, if you don't mind." Dana looked back at Thor. He hadn't moved an inch. "Ma'am," she said, stepping forward. "We need to open this wall." That's when Joanne's hand trembled, and Dana saw the truth in her eyes. She didn't just know what was behind that wall. She helped put it there. Thor didn't move. He stood frozen at the base of the basement wall, ears up, chest tense, tail stiff behind him like a rod. Not barking, not growling, just waiting, staring dead ahead at a place no human I would find suspicious. But Thor, he knew. Officer Dana Mercer knew it, too. She could feel it in her spine, in the way his body reacted. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't distracted. He was absolutely certain. "Ma'am," Dana repeated, her tone firm. "Step aside." Joanne Wainwright was shaking now. She clutched the bottom of her cardigan like it might anchor her in place. "It's just an old crawl space. There is nothing back there, just mice and boxes." Dana looked her dead in the eyes. "Move now." Joanne didn't. She just stared, her lip twitching slightly. Thor took one step forward, letting out a sharp Clinton warning bark that made Joanne jump. That was enough. Joanne backed off. Dana radioed in. Code 63. Possible concealed structure requesting backup. And I need a breaching kit now. Minutes later, a small team of officers arrived with tools and backup lights. Dana secured Joanne upstairs with a female officer, while Thor stayed rooted in place downstairs. He hadn't so much as blinked. One officer swung a sledgehammer hard into the wall. The first hit cracked through the drywall. A second swing sent plaster flying. The third tore open a gap, and a smell hit them immediately. Not death, not rot, but something wrong. It was air that didn't belong in a sealed basement. Slightly damp, slightly warm. The smell of too much breath in too little space. Flashlights swept the inside. Beyond the shattered drywall was a 3-foot crawl space that led to a plywood panel crudely screwed in, like someone trying to hide a bad secret quickly. Dana crawled in first, gun holstered, light in one hand. The panel came off with one solid yank. Behind it was a tiny hidden room about the size of a walk-in closet. It was lit by a single battery-operated lantern hanging from a nail. There was a mattress on the floor, stained, rumpled. A child's pink backpack leaned against the wall. A half-empty juice box sat next to it. Then, from the shadows in the far corner, a whisper. "Please don't yell." Dana's heart stopped. She aimed her flashlight. A small shape uncurled from a corner, like a fragile paper being gently unfolded. Ellie James, hair tangled, face pale, eyes huge and scared. She wore the same purple hoodie from the missing poster, though it was now torn at the sleeves. Her knees were bruised, her lip cut, but she was alive. She was alive. "Ellie," Dana asked, crawling into the space. "Sweetheart, is that you?" The girl didn't answer at first. She shrank against the wall. Thor barked once from behind the breech, sharp, but not aggressive. Ellie's eyes widened, then softened. She peeked around Dana and whispered, "The dog." Dana turned. "Thor, you know him?" Ellie nodded faintly. "He was outside. I heard him barking yesterday. I thought maybe it was safe." Dana swallowed hard. "You're safe now. We're getting you out." "Okay, you're okay." But Ellie didn't move. She shook her head slowly. Is the quiet man gone?" Dana froze. The quiet man. Upstairs, Joanne Wainwright sat at the kitchen table like a statue. Her hands were folded, but her knuckles were bone white. She hadn't said a word since backup arrived. When the team confirmed Ellie was alive, the paramedics were called instantly. Dana carried the girl up in her arms, wrapped in an emergency blanket. Ellie winced in the light and clung to Dana's shoulder like her life depended on it. Thor followed close behind, never once taking his eyes off the little girl. When Ellie was wheeled out to the ambulance, neighbors began emerging from their homes. Whispers turned into gasps. Someone dropped their coffee. A man from across the street ran out in his slippers and shouted, "Is that her? Oh my God, that's Ellie." Paramedics confirmed that although Ellie was weak and dehydrated, she would recover. The bigger concern, trauma, psychological damage. She hadn't been outside in over 3 weeks. Inside, Dana sat Joanne down again. "Who is the quiet man, Joanne?" No answer. "Your husband." Joanne finally blinked. He said he was helping her. Dana's jaw tightened. Helping. He said her family didn't love her, that they'd hurt her, that she needed a safe place. He said he'd teach her to trust again. Dana stared at her in disbelief. "So, you helped him build a prison?" Joanne's face crumpled, but there were no tears, only a quiet, almost childlike murmur. "Patrias, he said we were doing the right thing." Thor, still standing beside Dana, let out a low growl. Harold Wainwright wasn't at home during the discovery. He had reportedly left that morning to pick up medications and hadn't returned. An APB was issued by sundown. His vehicle, a rusted blue sedan, was found abandoned near a hiking trail 10 miles outside town. They found Harold 2 days later, hiding in an old hunting shack with rope, food supplies, and one of Ellie's socks in his backpack. He was arrested without incident. What followed was a media storm. News trucks lined the street. Every national outlet wanted the scoop on the girl behind the wall. But the real credit didn't go to technology, tips, or anonymous calls. It went to Thor, the dog who wouldn't let go. Thor became a local hero overnight. Kids drew him in sidewalk chalk. The sheriff's department received over 3,000 letters in a week, most addressed to the brave dog. One fourth-grade class mailed Thor a box full of peanut butter bones and handmade card that read, "Thank you for saving her." But the truth was heavier than any celebration. Ellie didn't speak much those first few days. She stayed close to Dana and responded better when Thor was in the room. She refused to talk about the nights in the hidden space or the games Harold had her play. Still, she asked one thing before bed on her second night in the hospital. "Can Thor sleep here?" Dana said yes. He curled up under her bed and didn't move until morning. Dana later sat down with Paula and Mark James, Ellie's parents. The reunion had been emotional, chaotic, full of sobs and hugs. But behind the joy was guilt. Why hadn't they suspected the neighbor? Why hadn't they heard her? Dana explained that Harold Wainwright had built the room with soundproof insulation, likely years before. He'd created the perfect hiding spot. Joanne, though complicit, claimed she never entered the basement, only followed instructions. The FBI stepped in soon after, linking Harold to 2 other unsolved child disappearance cases, one in South Carolina, one in Tennessee. Neither had ended like Ellie's. Ellie was the first to be found alive, because of a dog who refused to stop searching. Ellie eventually spoke at a small press gathering, sitting beside Dana, Thor at her feet. She wore a yellow headband and a bright smile that only flickered once in a while. When asked what she remembered most, she answered softly, "I kept yelling at first, but nobody heard me. Then one day, I heard a bark. It was Thor. He found me." She leaned down and hugged him. The cameras flashed. The hospital walls were too white. That's the first thing Ellie James told the therapist on her second day. Too white. Like that wall, she mumbled, staring out the window without really seeing it. I used to count the bumps. What bumps, sweetheart? The therapist asked gently. The ones in the paint, behind the wall. Ellie never called it a room. To her, it was just behind the wall. A place where time didn't pass and noise didn't matter because no one could hear her, and no one came. No one until Thor. At first, Dana Mercer wasn't sure how deep Ellie's trauma went. The girl rarely spoke. She wouldn't sleep unless Thor was lying nearby. If he left the room for even a minute, she'd grow agitated, sometimes bursting into quiet sobs, other times curling into a ball. Dana started bringing Thor every morning and letting him stay through the night. At one point, Ellie asked if Thor was her dog now. Dana smiled and said, "He's yours as long as he wants to be." That seemed to calm her. Ellie would sometimes just sit next to him, running her fingers through his fur in silence. When she did speak, it came in pieces, fragments of memory, names without context. A game of pretend house where the man with the soft voice told her what to say, what to eat, when to sleep. "Did the woman hurt you too?" Dana asked once. "No," Ellie said quickly. "She just never looked at me." Meanwhile, Harold Wainwright was in custody, charged with kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, endangering the welfare of a child, and facing federal scrutiny over new potential charges in 2 other missing child cases from the Southeast. His wife, Joanne, was being held under suspicion of conspiracy and obstruction, though she continued to claim ignorance. When investigators tore apart the Wainwright basement, they made a chilling discovery. Behind the wall, where Ellie had been hidden, was a second sealed panel. One not even Dana had noticed. This one held no room, just a crate. Inside, children's clothes, a broken Polaroid camera, and a tattered backpack that didn't belong to Ellie. DNA testing later confirmed the items belonged to Amanda Griggs, an 11-year-old girl who vanished in Columbia, South Carolina, in 1998. Amanda had never been found. The media frenzy intensified overnight. What had once been a miraculous rescue story was now shaping into something darker. A story of a predator who had hidden in plain sight for decades. Dana wasn't a profiler, but something about Harold Wainwright made her skin crawl. The soft voice, the carefully ironed shirts, the way he offered sweet tea during the first search like he was part of the neighborhood watch. He had created a world behind walls. One no one questioned because no one wanted to. The FBI called in a forensic psychologist. He told Dana something she would never forget. Guys like him don't just stop, they escalate. If Thor hadn't found Ellie when he did, we'd be working a recovery instead of a rescue. Back at the hospital, Ellie's drawings began to change. At first, they were mostly dark circles, scribbles, a tall figure next to a small one, always standing behind a wall of lines. But then slowly, color crept in. One day, she drew Thor with a superhero cape. Another time, she drew Dana with a big smile and Thor licking her face. Ellie still struggled to sleep, but she no longer panicked when the lights were off. Dana sat with her on the hospital bench one morning. It was the first day Ellie had gone outside in sunlight since her rescue. She wore pink sunglasses and gripped Thor's leash tightly. "You okay?" Dana asked. Ellie nodded, not letting go of the leash. "Why do people put walls where no one should be?" Dana paused. "Sometimes people are afraid of being seen, so they build walls, but dogs, they see through them." Ellie looked down at Thor, who let out a gentle huff, as if he agreed. At the Maple Ridge Police Department, Officer Dave Whitaker was going over archived files when he found something odd. In a 2013 report from Georgia, a 9-year-old girl named Sophia Ruiz had disappeared from her backyard. A neighbor had been questioned and cleared. An older man who owned a blue car and had volunteered for search duty. The name on the file, Harold Wainwright. Same man, different state, different name. He had lived under a different alias for years. Dana was called in immediately. "How deep does this go?" she muttered, flipping through the documents. "Too deep," Whitaker said. "We think he's been moving state to state since the late 80s. Always under different names. He buys houses cheap, fixes them up just enough to look normal, and blends in. And Joanne looks like she joined him around 2002. Before that, there's no record of her being connected to him. Dana rubbed her temples. How did no one see this coming? Whitaker shrugged. Because no one wanted to believe it. And when you're polite, white-haired, and say, "Yes, ma'am," people assume you're safe. As the investigation expanded, Ellie became something bigger than a victim. She became a symbol. The mayor of Maple Ridge declared an official Thor Day, where families gathered in the town square. Kids got free ice cream, and Thor wore a gold medal around his neck while Ellie held his leash. The sheriff gave a speech about loyalty that never quits, and Dana was awarded a departmental commendation. But for Dana, none of that mattered more than what Ellie said afterward in the car. "I used to think I was stuck behind a wall forever," she whispered, looking out the window. But Thor didn't see a wall. He saw me. That night, Dana sat on her porch steps, sipping a glass of iced tea, while Thor lay beside her. She scratched behind his ears and looked at the stars. "I know they call you a hero," she said quietly, "but I think what you really are is a listener." Thor didn't react much, just flicked an ear and gave a little grunt. But Dana knew he understood. In the weeks that followed, Ellie moved in temporarily with her aunt in Asheville, while her parents received trauma counseling and rebuilt their home, literally and emotionally. Ellie kept Thor's picture beside her bed. Dana sent her voice notes of Thor barking or huffing into the mic whenever Ellie had a tough night. One evening, Dana received a drawing in the mail. It was a house with no walls, just Thor standing in the middle and Ellie smiling in the sunlight. It was supposed to be over. After Ellie was rescued, after Harold and Joanne Wainwright were booked, after the wall came down, Maple Ridge began to breathe again. The porch lights went back to normal. The neighborhood watch meetings stopped filling up with fear. The news vans rolled out. People clung to the hope that the nightmare was over. But Dana Mercer knew better. Some cases don't end. They evolve. The boxes started arriving 2 weeks after Ellie moved in with her aunt. Each one postmarked from a different address. Greensboro, then Charleston, then Ocala. Inside, items that made no sense together. A child's mitten, an old Valentine's card, a shoe from the 90s, all stuffed into manila folders or cardboard sleeves. The sender, anonymous. At first, Dana thought it was some sick prank, a weirdo trying to ride the media attention. But the third box changed everything. It contained a school photo of a girl about 10, blonde hair, chipped front tooth. On the back, written in pencil, Nina, 2004, Hendersonville. The name triggered something. Dana pulled up the FBI database and ran a search. There it was. Nina Forsyth, age 10, missing since March 2004. Last seen walking home from school in Hendersonville, North Carolina. Disappeared just 3 weeks after Harold Wainwright sold a home 5 blocks from her bus stop. Chills ran through Dana's arms. The man had been right there again, and no one had seen him. She brought the photo and evidence boxes to the FBI field office in Charlotte. Agent Preston, the lead on the Wainwright case, flipped through the contents with a look that only hardened over time. "We've had our suspicions he was tied to other disappearances," Preston muttered. "But this is direct. Someone wants us to find her." "Why now?" Dana asked. "Why after all these years? Why send it to me? You were the one who found Ellie. Or more accurately, Thor did." Back in Maple Ridge, Dana sat in her patrol car longer than usual after her shift. Thor was in the back seat, sprawled across the seat like he owned it. He was resting, but not asleep. Every so often, his ears would flick, always alert, always listening. "You think she's still out there?" Dana asked him softly. "Or is this a breadcrumb trail to another wall?" Thor blinked at her through the metal grate. He didn't need to answer. The Wainwright home was still under investigation, cordoned off with yellow tape and a posted watch. But with new federal warrants, Dana was given clearance to re-enter with Agent Preston and 2 forensic techs. This time, they weren't looking for Ellie. They were looking for Nina. The basement was just as Dana remembered, musty, painted over, almost too neat for a man who had kept a child prisoner. But now that she knew what to look for, things felt wrong. The paint on the wall Thor had once sat in front of, still fresh. But the rest of the basement walls were different, older, slightly uneven. "Check the west corner," Dana told the techs. They scanned the wall with a thermal imaging tool. At first, nothing showed, but when they zoomed in, there it was. A faint outline, a temperature anomaly. Preston stepped back. That's not a stud wall. It's hollow. Dana didn't hesitate. Open it. They used crowbars this time. The wall cracked inward with a low groan. Plaster crumbled. Behind it, a cavity no larger than a small closet. Inside were plastic containers sealed with duct tape. Children playing in backyards or climbing on jungle gyms. But every photo had one thing in common. The same handwriting on the back, names, dates, and cities. It was a CA inside, the containers, photos, dozens of them, all of children. The images weren't violent, just still. School photos, candid snapshots, talag, worse, a trophy case. Some of the kids had been declared missing. Others, horrifyingly, had never even been reported. Among them, Dana found a second picture of Nina Forsyth. Same chipped tooth, different outfit. The date read, March 6, 2004. First morning here. Here, in this house. Jesus, Preston whispered. He documented everything. One of the forensic techs held up a different photo, this time of a boy about 6, sitting on what looked like a basement floor with a toy truck in his hands. The handwriting on the back read, Daniel stayed 3 days, left too soon. Dana's stomach turned. We need to tear this house down to the studs, she said. There's more here. I can feel it. And Thor, he stood at the foot of the newly opened wall and did something he hadn't done in days. He barked. The next morning, the news broke. The Wainwright house was now considered an active crime scene in an ongoing serial abduction investigation. The term suspected child predator compound started trending online. Parents across the Southeast started calling local PDs, asking if their missing children might be among the photos. Backlash was immediate. Why wasn't this house searched more thoroughly the first time? How many kids had this man harmed? And how had Harold Wainwright stayed invisible for so long? Dana didn't sleep that night. She stayed up reviewing each photo, each note. Some of the kids had never been looked for. They'd been assumed to be runaways. Others had aged out of the system, their files collecting dust in cold case cabinets. She pulled out the one photo she couldn't stop staring at. Nina, her small smile, the slight slouch of her shoulders like she never fully felt safe. Thor sat beside her, resting his head on her lap as she traced Nina's name with her finger. You found Ellie, Dana whispered. Can you find Nina, too? Thor didn't move, but the next morning he started pulling again. The trail wasn't obvious, but Thor kept circling back to an old garden shed in the back of the Wainwright property. The shed had been deemed irrelevant in the first search, filled with lawn equipment and a rusted grill. But this time, Dana looked closer. The floorboards near the back corner seemed off, too clean, and the smell, it wasn't rot, but it was damp, faintly musty, like earth had been disturbed and never settled. They pulled up the floorboards. Underneath, a metal trapdoor. Dana's breath caught. She looked at Thor. He stared back, unwavering. Call the team, she said. The crawl space beneath the shed led to a narrow tunnel reinforced with plywood, lined with battery-powered lights that had long since gone dark. Someone had built it with purpose. Maybe as a second hiding spot, maybe as an escape. Halfway down the tunnel, they found a small room, empty almost. There was a blanket on the ground, and in the corner, scratched into the wall with something sharp, 3 words, Nina was here. The room was old, long since abandoned, but the message, it was recent. Maybe weeks old, maybe days. Agent Preston leaned in. If she left this, she might still be alive. Dana stood frozen, staring at the name on the wall. And behind her, Thor began to growl again. At first, no one wanted to believe it. A handwritten message scratched into plywood, Nina was here, was too fragile a clue, too thin to carry the weight of hope. But for Dana Mercer and Agent Preston, it was a spark in the dark. Someone had been inside that tunnel recently, and more importantly, that someone had wanted to be found. The room beneath the shed was examined with forensic precision. Soil samples, fingerprints, scraps of cloth, and food packaging dated only a month or 2 old. This wasn't an abandoned hole from 2004. It had been used recently, maybe even while Ellie was being held just yards away. But how could Harold Wainwright have been running 2 hideouts? He couldn't. He wasn't alone. The next 48 hours were a flurry of phone calls, data pulls, and interviews with everyone who'd ever worked near the Wainwright property. One name kept coming up. Cliff Randall, a quiet, middle-aged man, worked for a local pest control company. Lived alone in a camper behind his cousin's auto shop. Paid in cash. No social media. No criminal record. No outstanding parking tickets. He was, as one detective put it, a shadow with a toolbox. He also happened to be Harold Wainwright's handyman. Dana's stomach dropped when she found an invoice signed just 6 months ago. Shed floor reinforcement and panel install. Paid in cash. She printed it out and slid it across the table to Agent Preston. He built the trapdoor. Tracking Cliff down wasn't hard. He wasn't running, because he didn't think anyone was looking. When Dana and Preston pulled up behind the dingy mechanic shop, Cliff was sitting in a lawn chair, drinking a soda, watching the sun disappear behind a stack of junk cars. He looked up casually when Dana stepped out. "Something I can help you with?" "Yeah," Dana said, flashing her badge. "You know Harold Wainwright?" He didn't blink. "Did some work on his house a couple months back. Real quiet guy. Paid cash." "Why?" Dana watched him. "Did he ever show you the inside of his shed?" Cliff leaned back in the chair. "Nope. Just told me to patch the floor. Didn't say why. Didn't care." Thor, who had been sitting quietly at Dana's side, stood. His body stiffened. His ears went up. Then, without warning, he growled. Low, sharp. The sound of something primal recognizing danger. Dana didn't touch her weapon, but her hand hovered near it. "Mind if we look around?" Cliff smirked. "You got a warrant?" "Not yet," Preston said, stepping beside her. "But we can get one." Cliff stared back, amused, but a bead of sweat slipped down the side of his face. He stood slowly. "Be my guest." The camper was filthy, strewn with old newspapers, half-eaten TV dinners, and tools tossed like trash. But it wasn't until Dana opened the narrow closet that the smell hit her. Not rot, not garbage. Shampoo, cheap, floral, meant for kids. She turned and called to Preston, her voice tight. "Get CSU here now." Inside the closet, behind a false panel, they found a tiny compartment. Inside, a stack of journals written in jagged handwriting, disposable cameras, some used, some still wrapped, a tattered blue backpack, and one more note. "She's not safe, but she's trying." Preston scanned the room. "She's still running." Dana nodded. And he helped her, at least for a while. The journals told a strange story. Cliff had known about Harold's activities for at least 10 years. He never said a word. Sometimes he helped with construction. Other times he looked the other way. But in one entry, scrawled in near illegible ink, Cliff admitted that in early 2023, he found Nina. She was in the tunnel, eating out of a trash bag. She wasn't a girl anymore, but she wasn't grown either. She saw me, didn't speak, just ran into the woods. The next day he wrote again, "I left food a blanket." She took it. Then, in another entry weeks later, she scratched her name on the wall. "She's still here." They called in cadaver dogs and drones. The woods behind the Wainwright property stretched nearly 90 acres, connected to a larger state preserve. There were hundreds of places someone could hide, especially someone who had lived in hiding most of her life. And that's when Dana made a decision no one expected. She brought Thor into the woods. No leash, no commands, just a quiet whisper. "Go find her." He ran. For nearly an hour, Dana and a small search team trailed behind him. Thor darted in and out of tree lines, circling back to sniff branches, digging briefly near an old log. But then he stopped. Not at a body, not at a shelter, at a trail of clotheslines strung between 2 trees, barely visible unless you were looking for it. On the line, small clothes, a makeshift sheet, and pinned to the bark of the nearest tree, a note. "I don't trust you, but I trust the dog." Preston read it aloud and looked at Dana. "She's watching." Dana nodded. "And she's afraid." They set up trail cameras and left supplies in clear bins. Food, water, medical kits, notebooks with pens. Each morning, the bins were emptied. Each morning, a new note appeared. Some were cryptic. "I only come out at night." "People hurt." "Dogs protect." Is Harold dead? Others were heartbreaking. I still hear his voice when I close my eyes. I want to be real again. Dana wrote back in soft handwriting. Letters she left in the bins. You are real. You are brave. We're not here to hurt you. Thor misses you. One note returned with a tiny drawing. A girl curled next to a dog. The break came on the 9th day. One of the trail cams caught movement around 4:12 a.m. A girl, thin blonde, wearing a jacket far too large for her. She crouched beside the bin, read the letter inside, and just before turning away, looked straight at the camera. Her eyes were haunted, but alive. Preston called in. We found her. They didn't storm in. No helicopters, no shouting. Just Dana sitting at the treeline one morning, quietly reading a letter aloud. She didn't know if Nina was listening. I was told you left too soon, Dana said. That's what he wrote. But I don't believe that. I think you left right on time. I think you fought every day. And I think you're ready now. Then she whistled once. Thor, who had been sitting silently beside her, perked up. From the trees, a figure moved. Nina, thin, pale, but standing. And in the stillness of that morning, she whispered one word. Thor. He trotted toward her. She fell to her knees and wrapped her arms around him. The air that morning was still, the kind of stillness that comes just before something breaks open, not with noise, but with relief. Nina Forsyth stepped out of the forest barefoot, her feet caked in mud, her eyes hollow, but focused. She didn't run. She didn't speak. She just walked, one cautious step at a time, toward the only living soul she trusted, Thor. He met her halfway, tail swaying slowly, head tilted as if remembering. She dropped to her knees and pressed her face into his fur, like a child waking from a nightmare. And for the first time in over 20 years, Nina let herself be seen. No more shadows, no more walls. Paramedics stood by, but Nina refused the stretcher. She let Dana wrap a blanket around her shoulders and walked with her slowly to the SUV. She clutched a piece of notebook paper in her hand, a final letter she had written, but never left in the bin. She passed it silently to Dana. It read, "If I walk out, don't take me back inside ever again." Dana folded the note gently, slipped it into her jacket, and nodded. "You have my word." And she kept it. At the hospital, Nina was examined for malnourishment, infection, and long-term exposure to cold. Doctors were stunned. Not just that she had survived off-grid for so long, but that she was lucid, coherent, and aware of the date. She knew her real name. She knew what Harold Wainwright had done. She remembered everything. But when asked about the others, the children in the photos, the journal entries, the message boards she had scratched into trees around the forest, she clammed up, not in fear, but in protection. "I wasn't the only one," she told Dana in private. "But I might be the only one left." The FBI confirmed what Dana already suspected. Harold Wainwright hadn't just abducted and isolated children. He had traded them secretly, quietly, between properties, between states, with the help of others like Cliff Randall. Nina had escaped one of those transfers. But rather than run to police, she'd run to the woods, trusting that the system wouldn't believe her. Because once a long time ago, it hadn't. "I knocked on a door once," she whispered to Dana. "Tried to tell a woman I was in danger. She told me not to bother her again. I was 11. That moment broke her faith in people. It took a dog to rebuild it. Thor remained at her bedside for 3 nights straight. When he wasn't at the hospital, he paced by the front door of Dana's house, like something was unfinished. Truth was, he had done the impossible twice. First with Ellie, now with Nina. But Dana knew Thor wasn't just sniffing out victims. He was sniffing out stories that were never allowed to end properly. The mayor of Maple Ridge held another press conference, this one nationally televised. Behind him stood Dana, Agent Preston, and Thor, wearing a navy blue vest with a silver badge. K9 Thor Honorary Detective. People across the country sent cards, hand-drawn posters, and donations to the newly formed Thor Fund, a program designed to help law enforcement reopen cold missing children cases using retired canines with specialized handlers. Dana was asked to lead it. She said yes, but she added one condition. "Thor comes with me." Nina's case became a national story, featured on major networks and true crime podcasts. But Dana limited access to interviews. She's not a headline, Dana told one reporter. She's a survivor, not your next ratings grab. When Nina did finally agree to speak, it was at a small town hall event. No cameras, just locals, families, survivors. She stood behind a wooden podium in jeans and a flannel shirt, hands shaking as she unfolded a piece of paper. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I used to think if I ever escaped, no one would believe me," she said. "Then I saw a dog sit in front of a wall and refuse to move, and someone listened." She looked down at Thor, lying near the front row. He heard me before anyone else did. Ellie was there, too, sitting with her parents and clutching her own drawing of Thor. The moment the two girls locked eyes across the room was unforgettable. Different lives, same wound, same rescue. After the event, Ellie approached Nina, nervous at first. Nina knelt beside her. "Did you draw that?" she asked. Ellie nodded. "That's you and Thor." Nina smiled softly. "He looks like a superhero." Ellie whispered, "He is." The Wainwright house was demolished within 6 weeks. The town voted unanimously to raze it to the ground. In its place, they planted a garden, open to the public, free of gates. A sign at the front read, "For the ones who were silenced and the ones who refused to stop listening." Every spring, a ceremony is held, and every year, Dana and Thor lead the walk down the garden path. As for Cliff Randall, he was tried in federal court and sentenced to 35 years in prison. He testified against Harold Wainwright in exchange for a reduced sentence, but his words meant little. Harold died in custody 3 months before his first court appearance. A heart attack, no closure, no confession, just silence. But that silence didn't win because Nina was still standing. Months passed. Dana continued her work with the Thor Fund, visiting departments across the Southeast, training new teams in cold case, canine detection. But no matter where they went, no matter how many cases they reopened, it always came back to one moment. That wall, that bark, that refusal to walk away. One rainy night, Dana sat with Nina on the back porch of a safe house tucked deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Thor lay between them, now grayer around the muzzle, but still alert. "Do you ever wonder?" Dana asked. "What would have happened if we hadn't found you?" Nina stared into the trees. "I wouldn't have made it through another winter." They sat in silence for a while. Then Nina turned. "But I wasn't waiting for you." Dana frowned. "What do you mean?" "I was waiting for him." She reached down and scratched behind Thor's ears. He was the only one who came back. A few months later, Thor retired officially. He spent his days lying in the sun on Dana's porch, and his nights curled at her feet. Every once in a while, he'd still perk up at certain sounds, like footsteps on gravel or the soft squeak of hinges opening. Instincts, after all, don't retire. But he earned his rest. He had found the forgotten. He had unburied the buried. He had broken through walls no one else could see. And he had reminded an entire country that sometimes the loudest voices are the ones that don't speak at all. Thank you for following the incredible story of Thor, Dana, Ellie, and Nina. A story of loss, survival, and the loyalty of a dog who never gave up. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What moment in this story touched your heart the most? Drop your thoughts below. And if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe to the channel to stay updated on real-life stories of rescue, courage, and healing.